Hi, I'm Anna Brown. I'm with the Rockefeller Foundation.
I'm David Satterthwaite. I'm with the International Institute for Environment and Development.
Do you see opportunities or examples of where there's been dynamism or where cities are attempting to take measures toward building climate change resilience, climate change mitigation measures in lower income countries, not necessarily just higher income countries?
Well, you have a group of country or group of cities in middle-income nations that have really worked well on this. Very often, these are cities with the capacity to provide basic infrastructure: water, sewers, drains, healthcare, emergency services to all or virtually all their population. Some have actually also combined a commitment to mitigation, such as the city of Durban. The city of Manizales in Colombia has also done so. The city of Rosario in Argentina has certainly increased its resilience to climate change, but much of this was by improving conditions now for their citizens, better infrastructure, better flood management, healthcare service that was open access to all. And of course, this raises the issue for a city that wants to address climate change adaptation. It needs the basic infrastructure in place. It also needs the financial and the institutional capacity to do so. If you look at many cities in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, with the exception of Cape Town, half the population doesn't have piped water or sewers or drains. There's no functioning healthcare and emergency services for half to three-quarters of the population. These are also the cities with almost no independent investment capacity. These are the cities that worry me most.
No, I think the point about capacity and the existence of institutions is one that's critical, and I think from our experience in ACCCRN, that's been where there's so much work that needs to be done. It's often kind of softer measures that can be taken, and it's quite complex to be able to, and it's long-term. It's a long-term agenda toward building capacity that's really locally housed. It's not coming in, people flying in from outside to kind of swoop in and fix things, but there's a need for kind of really nested knowledge, capacity, and understanding.
One of the nice things about the ACCCRN cities is it shows innovation in cities where you hadn't really expected it. And one of the important issues to me, we have to learn from cities that are trying to address climate change adaptation and development. And it needs to be a very deep and rich learning process. This isn't something that's done by an external researcher hopping in for 2 weeks and interviewing a few people. It actually needs that in-depth engagement with city government, with civil society. And this is what the ACCCRN cities are telling us. Not all of them achieving the success we would hope for, but all of them striving and struggling, or with groups in the city striving and struggling. And these are really important. This is the basis for learning about climate change adaptation in cities.
No, and I think you're right. Particularly the arrangements within cities where it's just it's different types of institutions. Maybe it's largely within government, but hopefully engaging other stakeholders as well. But kind of bridging information, reporting lines, those types of opportunities for coordination and knowledge sharing and information sharing to sort of inform decision making. And that's been, I think, one of the important lessons from ACCCRN, and it comes out of many other bases of practice. Durban has been, obviously one of the cities that has been looking at this issue for such a long time and has made such traction. And as you rightly point out, there's a long ways to go. I think the piece about the political systems and the politics is one that I think, particularly from coming from a more of an urban planning background, I think that's one of the pieces that gets short shrift a lot of times and doesn't get sufficient attention. And I think especially in the kind of climate change coming from a climate change science perspective, politics is sometimes kind of set aside. And I think there's a need for really continuing to engage more directly with the politics of cities and the politics of these questions, which really are about land and about who gets it, who and for what, and protecting resources that may not have an immediate economic return, but maybe would yield public goods and public benefits over a longer time horizon. But I think that the politics piece that requires the right sets of actors who can engage and elevate questions and engage a discourse at the city and hold people accountable.
No, I would agree absolutely, and certainly a lot of the innovation in Latin America has been in countries where there were real decentralization. City mayors elected for the first time, city councils elected for the first time, new candidates for mayors that came outside the conventional political parties. You know, how often some of the innovative mayors have been doctors or engineers bringing new perspectives. Mm-hmm. I mean, I suppose the other issue that interests me too is the politics of building resilience. You know, I live in London. I live in a home that has piped water, sewers, drains. My house meets building standards. I have immediate access to emergency services, to healthcare, to schools. My home is insured. My possessions of my house are insured. All of these were built by social and political pressure from people that didn't have these entitlements, to the point where almost the entire city has it. None of it to do with climate change, but building immense resilience both in the institutions and in the infrastructure to extreme weather events and other potential changes from climate change. So here we can see how and why political processes delivered that, because it was delivering for London citizens, especially low-income London citizens. What is more difficult to see is the incentives that drive us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and in a sense make a commitment to the needs of those in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and 100 years.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's an inherent sort of inequality in the picture where the impacts are felt strongest, not only in the countries that have lowest incomes, but amongst the populations and within the cities of the people who are living in slum settlements or without multiple redundancies to be able to access water when one system kind of fails. I think when you start engaging on the question of resilience building or adaptation to climate change, you realize kind of quickly that one of the most important steps that has to be taken is more aggressive measures on greenhouse gas emissions and reductions, because some of the sort of scales of impacts we're likely to see are sort of so immense that it goes well beyond kind of just coping with certain whole bands of land not necessarily existing in the future. Some of the 4-degree scenarios that are coming out. So I think that I kind of wonder sometimes whether there's a political will question, as always, but how can climate change resilience building, can that be create a new kind of opportunity to galvanize interest in a more transformative agenda that does get to questions of consumption patterns and production and how we live, and not only be thinking about resilience building and adaptation, which is important, but kind of thinking about the equity question and how we must, as a global society, do things really differently. There has to be a paradigm shift.
You know, in a sense, every city needs the protection from everyday hazards and occasional hazards and seasonal hazards and small disasters and large disasters within the bigger framework of climate change. And it would be very odd if we mobilize cities to adapt to climate change, which is, you know, responding to the risks, and not mitigation, which is what reduces the risks. And I think what scares all my friends and colleagues that work on climate change is how adaptation only really works in the short term if there is mitigation. How quickly we move to climate change that's so dangerous that it's very difficult to adapt to, or almost impossible to adapt to. So to me, the unifying theme is risk. It's risk today from malaria, diarrheal diseases, acute respiratory infections, risk of seasonal floods, risk of big disasters, and risks of climate change. All of them are risks that affect people and their assets and our cities and our culture and our society. It provides a unifying theme. And if we have a commitment to the needs and priorities of people today, then that can be extended to the needs and priorities of people in the future. And so all cities have to commit to mitigation within adaptation, within disaster risk reduction, and within everyday development. Otherwise, the future looks incredibly bleak. I suppose one issue that interests me, a lot of the priorities for development, climate change adaptation, and mitigation fall to local government, fall to city government. Yet all the discourse and the discussion about the Millennium Development Goals or the world we want post-2015 is national governments. The Conference of Parties is national governments. Somehow the international community has got to recognize that you've got to work with city governments, you've got to work with local governments. I know there's sometimes political difficulties in doing so, but if it's city governments that are going to deliver most of the adaptation, most of the mitigation, and most of the development, it's time we had them allowed to be part of the international discourse. And city mayors come, elected directly by their citizens and thrown out if they don't deliver. It's really important that we work with these. And so much of the innovation is also, again, around elected city governments and elected mayors. The UNISDR and the ACCCRN are so unusual because they're choosing to work with city governments. We need them to infect 35,000 other organizations.
Yeah, I'd agree.